Layla Ahmed believed in the clean, undeniable truth of mathematics. Every problem had a solution, every variable a value, every equation a balance. It was a world of logic and precision, a stark contrast to the cacophony of her 8th grade classroom at Northwood Middle. Her students, it seemed, were a collection of unsolved proofs, each one more bewildering than the last. The bell would ring, and with it, a wave of restless energy would crash over her. Desks scraped, whispers erupted, and the faint, persistent thrum of a dozen different anxieties would fill the air. Layla, precise in her movements, would stand at the whiteboard, marker poised, ready to unravel the mysteries of algebra. But the mysteries her students needed solving rarely involved X or Y. Ruby, a wisp of a girl with intelligent but perpetually downcast eyes, would sit slumped in the back row, her notebook a fortress of doodles rather than quadratic equations. Her silence was a heavy thing, a constant weight in the room. When called upon, she'd flinch, offering a barely audible, "I don't know," before retreating further into herself. Layla knew Ruby was bright. Her initial assessments had shown flashes of brilliance. But something had dimmed that light. Betty, on the other hand, was a supernova of disruption. With a laugh that could cut through concrete and a perpetually raised hand, usually to ask if Pythagoras ever had a crush, she was a master of deflection. She'd crack jokes, challenge procedures, or invent elaborate stories about why her homework wasn't done. While her antics often charmed other students into laughter, Layla saw past the bravado to the fear in Betty's eyes whenever a complex problem was written on the board. Betty was allergic to failure, and her antidote was a constant stream of chaos. Layla tried everything the textbooks and professional development seminars suggested. She drilled them on multiplication tables, assigned extra credit, offered after-school tutoring, to which only a handful ever showed. She implemented strict policies: no talking during lectures, hands raised to speak, consequences for incomplete work. The results were disheartening. Test scores remained dismal, homework completion rates plummeted, and the general mood of the classroom was one of resignation, punctuated by Betty's rebellious cheerfulness and Ruby's quiet despair. One particularly grueling Tuesday, Layla watched as her carefully constructed lesson on linear equations dissolved into a torrent of groans and blank stares. Betty was trying to teach her deskmate a complicated handshake, while Ruby had her head resting on her arms, seemingly asleep. A frustrated sigh escaped Layla's lips. "Can anyone tell me," she asked, her voice sharper than she intended, "why we equate the two expressions in a system?" Silence. Only the clatter of a dropped pencil and Betty's mischievous giggle broke the tension. Layla slammed her marker down. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a cold, bitter wave of defeat. She was doing everything right, by the book, by the numbers she so trusted. Yet, her classroom was failing, and she felt like the biggest failure of all. What was she missing? What was the variable she couldn't account for? She looked at the faces before her, some defiant, some withdrawn, some simply vacant, and realized her equations weren't balanced because she wasn't solving for the right variables. She wasn't solving for them. That evening, the heavy silence of her apartment felt louder than her classroom. Layla stared at a stack of ungraded papers, each one a testament to her students' struggles, and, by extension, her own. The perfectly aligned numbers on the page seemed to mock her. Logic, precision, truth, she'd always believed. But what if the truth was messier than a sum? What if the logic of a child's struggling mind didn't follow purely mathematical rules? She found herself thinking about Ruby's withdrawn demeanor, Betty's desperate need for attention. These weren't just academic issues, they were human ones. How could she expect them to grasp complex algebraic concepts when they were perhaps grappling with far more complex emotions? A memory surfaced. A student once confided in her about losing a pet the day before a major geometry test. Layla, focused on the curriculum, had offered a cursory, "I'm sorry," and moved on. The student had failed the test. Was that empathy? Or just an oversight? The next morning, Layla walked into her classroom with a different kind of preparation. No new equation on the board, no pop quiz. Instead, she rearranged the desks into small clusters, creating islands rather than rows. When the bell rang and the usual chaos began to brew, She simply stood at the front, a gentle smile on her face, and waited. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice softer than usual, cutting through the din. "Before we get into anything today, I just wanted to check in. How are we all feeling this morning? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being fantastic and 1 being, well, a bit rough." A few students exchanged puzzled glances. Betty, ever the rebel, raised her hand. "Is this a trick question, Ms. Ahmed? Is there a hidden variable X for how much coffee did you have?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room. Layla chuckled. "No tricks, Betty. Just an honest question. You don't have to share specifics if you don't want to, but it's good for us to acknowledge where we are before we dive into something new." Hesitantly, a few hands went up. One student mumbled a 6. Another, a 2, because my cat woke me up at 4 a.m. Layla listened, nodding, making eye contact. When it came to Ruby, she simply offered a small, encouraging smile. Ruby's hand hovered, then dropped, but a flicker of something, acknowledgement perhaps, passed between them. Layla then wrote a simple problem on the board. "If you have 10 apples and give 3 away, how many do you have?" A chorus of 7 erupted. "Okay," Layla continued. "Now, if your friend is sad because they only have 2 apples, and you still have 7, how do you solve that problem?" The room went quiet. This wasn't math as they knew it. Betty, surprisingly, was the first to speak. "You could give them some of your apples, Ms. Ahmed." "Exactly, Betty. And that's a different kind of problem solving, isn't it? It's about understanding someone else's situation and finding a way to help. Today we're going to try to do both. Solve math problems, but also solve for understanding each other." That day, the math lesson was still about linear equations, but Layla approached it differently. She encouraged students to work in their new clusters, not just on the problems, but on explaining the problems to each other. When Ruby struggled to grasp a concept, instead of immediately stepping in, Layla suggested another student try to explain it in their own words. "Ruby," Layla said gently, noticing her frustration, "why don't you try explaining what's confusing you to Maria? Sometimes just saying it out loud helps." Ruby mumbled, "I don't get why we have to isolate Y first." Maria, a usually quiet girl, paused, then said, "Think of it like Y is really shy and wants its own space. Or like it's a treasure, and you have to clear away all the junk around it to find it." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Ruby's lips. She looked at Maria, then back at her paper. It was a tiny crack in the dam, but Layla saw it. She realized that her initial equation for a successful classroom had been incomplete. It lacked the most crucial variable, empathy. The small changes snowballed. Layla began each class with a moment of connection, a brief check-in, a shared thought, or a student-led good news share. She introduced a mistake of the day segment, where she'd share a common error from the previous day's work, and instead of pointing fingers, she'd lead a discussion on why it was a common mistake and how to learn from it. She even shared a minor math error she'd made that morning, laughing at herself, modeling vulnerability. The physical space of the classroom shifted too. Posters appeared on the walls, not just of formulas, but of empathy rules. Listen to understand, not just to reply. Every voice has value. It's okay to not know, but it's not okay to not try. Students started decorating a struggle wall, where they could anonymously post concepts they found challenging, allowing Layla to tailor her lessons specifically to their needs. Layla put Ruby and Betty in the same cluster. Initially, it was a disaster. Betty's booming personality threatened to completely overshadow Ruby's delicate presence. But Layla intervened subtly. "Betty," she'd say, "I love your energy. Can you channel that into being a math whisperer for Ruby? Sometimes, a really loud explanation can be overwhelming. Try to listen to her questions and respond in a way that truly helps her understand." Betty, surprisingly, took the challenge seriously. She started asking Ruby questions like, "What part of this is making your brain itch, Rubes?" and would patiently wait for an answer, her usual rapid-fire delivery slowing to match Ruby's pace. She discovered that Ruby had a deep, intuitive understanding of numbers but struggled with the procedural steps, especially when under pressure. Betty, who excelled at remembering steps but sometimes missed the bigger picture, found her own understanding deepening as she articulated concepts for Ruby. One afternoon, during a lesson on ratios and proportions, Ruby became visibly distressed. She clutched her pencil, her knuckles white. Layla approached her desk. "Ruby, what's going on?" Ruby whispered, "I don't see the point, Ms. Ahmed. My mom says we can barely afford groceries. So what does it matter if 2 apples cost this much and 3 cost that much? It doesn't help." Layla knelt beside her. "You're right, Ruby. Sometimes, these problems feel very far away from our real lives. But what if we used proportions to figure out how to get the most groceries for your money? Or how to save up for something really important? Think about it not just as numbers, but as a path to making things better for you and your family." Ruby looked up, her eyes wide. "Really?" "Absolutely," Layla affirmed. "Math is a tool. We just have to learn how to wield it for what matters to us." This conversation was a turning point. Layla started designing problems that were directly relevant to her students' lives. Budgeting for a family trip, calculating fuel efficiency for a car, understanding interest rates for a future college loan. The abstract became tangible. Betty, too, began to transform. Her desire to entertain and be noticed was redirected. She took on the role of team facilitator in their group, ensuring everyone had a chance to speak and understood the material. She started using her humor not to disrupt, but to enliven the learning, creating funny mnemonics for formulas or drawing hilarious diagrams to illustrate concepts. When a student was struggling, Betty was often the first to offer a word of encouragement, a shared memory of her own past struggles, or a creative way to approach the problem. Her fear of failure was replaced by a joyful embrace of the learning process, even the messy parts. Layla's classroom became a hub of active learning. The noise level was still present, but it was no longer chaotic. It was a productive hum of discussion, collaboration, and discovery. Students weren't afraid to ask stupid questions, because the struggle wall showed everyone had them. They weren't afraid to make mistakes because Betty would often loudly proclaim, "Another glorious error. What can we learn from it, intrepid mathematicians?" The transition wasn't instantaneous or without its challenges. There were days of regression, days when old habits resurfaced. But Layla remained steadfast, consistently reinforcing the message. This is our sanctuary. We learn together, we struggle together, and we grow together. By the end of the semester, Layla Ahmed's classroom was unrecognizable. The sterile, logical environment she once prized had blossomed into a vibrant, empathetic ecosystem of learning. The once struggling students were no longer just pupils. They were a community. Test scores saw a marked improvement, but more importantly, the students' attitude towards math had shifted profoundly. No longer was it a daunting, abstract subject. It was a puzzle, a tool, a language they were learning to speak with increasing fluency and diminishing fear. Ruby, once a phantom presence in the back row, now sat confidently, her hand raised frequently. She started tutoring her peers during study hall, patiently explaining concepts with a quiet wisdom that belied her age. Her grades soared, but it was the sparkle in her eyes, the newfound lightness in her step, that brought Layla the deepest satisfaction. Ruby had found her voice, and in doing so, had found her academic footing. Betty, the former queen of disruption, now led by example. Her boisterous energy was channeled into creating engaging presentations and leading group problem-solving sessions. She organized a Math in the Real World fair, where students showcased how mathematical concepts applied to their hobbies, future careers, and daily lives. She still made jokes, but now they were clever, insightful, and always served to enhance understanding rather than deflect from it. She had learned that true strength wasn't in masking vulnerabilities, but in embracing them and using them to connect with others. One afternoon, the principal, Mr. Harrison, observed Layla's class. He watched, astonished, as students debated the most efficient way to solve a complex word problem, offering different approaches, respectfully challenging each other's methods, and ultimately arriving at a collaborative solution. He saw Ruby confidently outline her logic on the whiteboard, and Betty cheerily encourage a hesitant peer. After the class, Mr. Harrison approached Layla. "Ms. Ahmed," he began, his voice filled with genuine admiration, I don't know what you did, but this isn't the same class I observed 6 months ago. The engagement, the confidence, the palpable sense of care. It's truly remarkable. You haven't just taught them math, you've taught them how to be better humans. Layla smiled, a warmth spreading through her that no perfectly solved equation had ever provided. I just realized, Mr. Harrison, that before we can solve for x, we have to solve for us. We have to understand the values, the variables, and the unique equations each student brings into the classroom. When they feel safe, when they feel seen, the numbers suddenly make sense. She looked out at her students, now packing up, a few lingering to ask each other questions, others laughing as Betty recounted a particularly amusing and mathematically accurate anecdote. These were not just students anymore. They were a testament to the transformative power of empathy. Layla Ahmed, the math teacher, had found her true equation for success. It wasn't just about logic. It was about the boundless, beautiful truth of the human heart and the sanctuary it could build, one compassionate connection at a time. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.